Pennsylvania 2013. A brutal cold case, once thought to be unsolvable, has finally been cracked, sending shockwaves through a quiet community still haunted by the memory of a little girl. Her name was Lily Anne Whitmore. Just 6 years old, she was a bright-eyed kindergarten student known for her love of butterflies and pink ribbons. One spring afternoon, she vanished from her neighborhood without a trace. Her bicycle was found abandoned. No witnesses, no clues. And as weeks turned into years, hope turned into heartbreak. But in 2023, a startling DNA breakthrough unlocked secrets buried for a decade and led to an arrest that no one could have seen coming. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Nestled between gentle hills and aging railroad tracks, the town of Derry, Pennsylvania hadn't changed much in decades. With a population just shy of 5,000, it was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where neighbors brought casseroles to each other during hard times, and where kids still rode bikes to school. It was the kind of town that called itself safe and believed it. At the center of one modest home on Willow Creek Drive lived 6-year-old Lily Anne Whitmore. She was the only child of Melissa Whitmore, a soft-spoken woman who worked as the local elementary school librarian. Melissa had raised Lily on her own since the day she was born. There was no father in the picture, no grandparents nearby. But what Lily lacked in family numbers, she made up for in community love. Lily was known all over town. Her wide smile and bouncy energy made her a little spark that brightened wherever she went. She loved butterflies. She drew them on everything: school folders, birthday cards, napkins. Her teachers said she was quiet but curious, always asking thoughtful questions. Her favorite color was pink, and she insisted on wearing at least one pink item every day, whether it was a ribbon in her hair or sparkly shoes. Melissa often said that Lily had an old soul. She preferred books over television, especially stories about animals and fairy tales where kindness triumphed. At school, she helped other kids pick up crayons. At the coffee shop downtown, she'd tug on the barista's apron just to say good morning. On Sunday mornings, she and her mom would sit on the porch sipping cocoa and waving to passing joggers and dog walkers. People loved Lily not just because she was adorable, but because she was genuine. She was the kind of child who reminded adults of the goodness they'd forgotten, and her laughter had a way of stopping strangers in their tracks. Her world was simple: school, playdates, coloring books, and bedtime stories. The walls of her room were covered in hand-drawn butterflies and glow-in-the-dark stars. Melissa did everything she could to make sure Lily felt safe, protected, and loved. But peace like that is fragile. In small towns, where tragedy feels like a distant concept, the sense of security can become a kind of blindness. And in places like Derry, that blindness can be dangerous. On paper, there was nothing unusual about the week leading up to May 3, 2013. Lily had attended school as usual. She had been at her best friend Katie's birthday party the previous weekend, giggling in a tiara and face paint. She had picked out a new coloring book from the bookstore with her mom just the day before. By all accounts, it was just another quiet spring week. But in hindsight, everyone would remember little details that didn't make sense. A man parked outside the school a little too long. A missing package from someone's porch. A door left ajar in a nearby field house. At the time, no one connected the dots. Why would they? In a town like Derry, nothing truly bad ever happened, until it did. Because on a sunny spring afternoon, the moment Lily waved goodbye to her mother and the moment she should have arrived at her friend's house, something unthinkable occurred. A little girl vanished. How does a child vanish in broad daylight with no one seeing a thing? Friday, May 3, 2013 began like any other in Derry, Pennsylvania. The sky was painted in soft pastels, the air carried the promise of spring, and school had just let out for the weekend. Lily Anne Whitmore bounded off the school bus wearing a pink headband and a backpack covered in butterfly patches. She ran up the steps of her home, calling out, "Mom, I'm home!" Melissa Whitmore was in the kitchen unpacking groceries. She gave Lily a warm smile as her daughter kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag by the door. A few minutes later, Lily asked the question she always asked on Fridays. "Can I go to Katie's?" Katie, her best friend since preschool, lived just 2 blocks away, an easy ride through the quiet neighborhood. It was a trip Lily had made countless times, always during daylight, always with Melissa's cautious blessing. The two had a system. Lily would wave once she arrived, and Katie's mom would send a quick confirmation text. Melissa checked her watch. 3:42 p.m., helmet on. "Straight to Katie's, no stops," she said, "as always, promise." Lily grinned and dashed out the door with her pink bike. The tires crunched lightly against the gravel as she pedaled down the sidewalk, her pigtails bouncing behind her. That was the last time Melissa saw her daughter. At 4:05 p.m., no wave. No text. Melissa called Katie's mom. Confusion turned to concern when Katie answered the phone herself and said, "Lily never came." Panic kicked in instantly. Melissa retraced the route herself. She jogged to Katie's, scanning both sides of the street. No sign of Lily, neighbors joined in. By 4:45 p.m., more than a dozen people were walking the sidewalks calling her name. Melissa's voice cracked with each desperate shout. Then, at 5:12 p.m., a teenager cutting through a vacant lot near Meadowbrook Lane noticed something strange in the tall grass. He stepped closer. Lily's bike. It lay on its side, front wheel slowly spinning. Her helmet hung loosely from the handlebar, as if it had been taken off and left there. There were no visible skid marks, no signs of a struggle, no blood. Just silence. The field bordered an old, unused maintenance shed and a line of woods beyond. It was a forgotten patch of land that most kids avoided. Police arrived quickly. The area was taped off. A K-9 unit was dispatched and a grid search began. Officers knocked on doors. Drones were launched. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty lot. By 7 p.m., an official Amber Alert had been issued for Lily Anne Whitmore. Her photo, pink headband and all, flashed across local TV stations and mobile phones. But despite the mobilized search, no one had seen anything. No scream, no struggle, no witnesses. It was as if Lily had vanished into thin air during a 2-block bike ride in the middle of a warm, sunny afternoon. Reporters descended by morning. News vans lined the streets. The town that once prided itself on safety now bore a heavy silence, broken only by the buzz of helicopters overhead. Melissa sat by the window all night, watching for headlights, waiting for someone to walk up the porch with good news. But no one did. The police, the neighbors, even strangers searched until their legs gave out. But Lily was gone. What really happened during those missing minutes between her home and her friend's house? It was the third day since Lily Anne Whitmore had vanished. Derry was no longer a quiet town, it was a place suspended in fear. Every wooded path, every empty shed, every mile of roadside had been combed by volunteers and law enforcement alike. Posters bearing Lily's sweet face and pink headband were taped to stop signs, storefronts, and utility poles. The silence that followed each failed search effort grew heavier. On Monday morning, May 6th, just after 8 a.m., a farmer named Glenn Havers was walking his retriever along a dirt trail that followed the banks of the Chestnut Creek, rough terrain about 4 miles outside of town. It wasn't a well-used path, more of a shortcut between distant pastures. As the dog veered toward the water's edge, Glenn spotted something caught in the mud near a cluster of reeds. A child's shoe. He recognized the brand immediately. It had been shown on the news. Pink canvas with a butterfly stitched on the side. Glenn dropped to his knees and yelled for his dog to stay. His hands trembled as he dialed 911. Within an hour, the area was flooded with police. Drones scanned from above. Divers were called in. Crime scene tape stretched between trees like a chilling ribbon. And by 4:10 p.m., search teams made the discovery no one wanted, but everyone feared. Lily's body was found partially submerged in the shallow, debris-choked water beneath a mass of tangled brush. Her arms were curled toward her chest. Her face, once full of life, was still. The site was immediately designated as a crime scene. Forensic teams began the meticulous process of preserving every possible trace of evidence: the waterlogged clothing, the soil, the branches, anything that might hold a clue. Melissa Whitmore was notified before sunset. A grief counselor was present, but there was no softening the words. Her knees buckled before the officer even finished his sentence. A scream echoed through her home. Raw, broken animal. The coroner's preliminary report came the next morning. Lily had suffered blunt force trauma and showed signs of being restrained. The cause of death was officially ruled a homicide. Derry went silent. Businesses closed early. Schools held moments of silence. A candlelight vigil formed outside the elementary school. Flowers, drawings, and stuffed animals piled beneath a mural where children had once played. Local news anchors struggled to keep composure. In one now infamous moment, Lily's kindergarten teacher broke down on live television, clutching a crayon drawing Lily had given her the week before she disappeared. Parents across town began driving their kids to school. Backyard play was no longer allowed. Doors were now locked at all hours. For a town that had built its identity on trust, the shift was seismic. But for investigators, the discovery only deepened the mystery. There were no clear tire tracks, no evidence of a struggle on site, and no cameras anywhere near the creek. The surrounding trees had shielded the scene from any aerial search in earlier days. It was as if someone had known precisely where to hide a body, somewhere no one would find unless they stumbled on it. The question burned through every detective on the case. How had someone transported a child several miles from town, on back roads and through brush without a single person seeing a thing? And why that location? Why did the killer choose that remote spot? And how had they avoided every camera and witness? In the days following the discovery of Lily Anne Whitmore's body, the investigation escalated into one of the most intense manhunts in Pennsylvania's recent history. The local police department, overwhelmed by the complexity and emotional weight of the case, called in reinforcements. By mid-May, the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI had joined the effort, transforming the town of Derry into a staging ground for what many hoped would be a swift path to justice. The first order of business was saturation. Officers canvassed every home within a 2-mile radius of Lily's route. Flyers were distributed door to door. Security footage from gas stations, intersections, and storefronts was reviewed frame by frame. Vehicles were tracked. People were questioned. Known sex offenders in the region were brought in for interviews and DNA swabs. A mobile forensics unit was set up in a church parking lot. Volunteers scoured wooded areas again, this time under federal guidance. Every dumpster, drainage pipe, and vacant building was checked. In the media, speculation ran rampant. Some residents reported seeing a white delivery van near the school on the day of Lily's disappearance. Others swore they'd noticed a stranger in town, a disheveled man lingering near the park. That man, later identified as a homeless veteran passing through, was located and cleared within 48 hours. Still, suspicion lingered. Attention then turned inward. Detectives interviewed teachers, parents, maintenance workers, bus drivers, anyone who had crossed paths with Lily. Her mother, Melissa, was interviewed twice. Her work computer and phone were searched, as were bank records. She cooperated fully, her grief barely masked by exhaustion. Another early theory centered on a former neighbor who had once been arrested on assault charges in another county. He had since moved, but his name re-entered the community like a whisper. Investigators located him states away, and though his alibi checked out, the town couldn't forget the headline. Hundreds of DNA samples were collected over the following weeks, voluntary cheek swabs from friends, neighbors, and known associates. Every male teacher, every delivery driver on the route, every maintenance worker at the school. Still, the results were frustrating. DNA collected from under Lily's fingernails was degraded. Water and time had eroded most forensic evidence. The partial fingerprint lifted from her pink bicycle's handlebar was too smudged. Partial, fragmented, and with no match in any database. The creek where she had been found yielded nothing definitive. No foreign fibers, no usable tire treads, no personal items. If the killer had left a trace, it had either been washed away or expertly concealed. As June gave way to July, the news coverage began to fade. The FBI scaled back their presence. Tips slowed. The once vibrant Find Lily Facebook page quieted. The yellow ribbons tied to mailboxes started to fray. Melissa Whitmore stopped answering the door for reporters. Her eyes hollowed. She rarely left the house. Derry changed. Trust eroded. Suspicion crept in. Parents eyed strangers warily. Children were kept within sight. The town that once knew everyone suddenly felt unfamiliar. And through it all, one unspoken fear began to grow. What if the person who took Lily was still among them? Shopping at the same grocery store, sitting at the same diner, living behind drawn curtains just a few houses away. Despite all the interviews, all the forensics, all the searching, no one had been arrested. Would the truth ever be uncovered? Or was Lily's killer destined to walk free? By the close of 2014, the town of Derry had begun to learn the painful rhythm of life without answers. The media had long moved on. The search teams had been disbanded. The mobile command post that once stood in the community center parking lot had been quietly removed. What had once felt like an urgent quest for justice now faded into routine silence. The special task force assigned to Lily Anne Whitmore's case was quietly dissolved in November of that year. The billboards along Highway 322, once illuminated with Lily's smiling face and the words, "Have you seen me?" were taken down or replaced with new advertisements. Flyers faded in windows until even their corners curled with dust. The phone tip line still rang, but not often, and when it did, it usually led nowhere. Melissa Whitmore, once the determined mother who stood before microphones begging for help, had stopped speaking publicly altogether. Grief hardened her, made her quieter, thinner. She returned to her librarian post part-time, but never spoke of Lily unless asked. Her home became a shrine, Lily's bedroom left untouched. The butterfly curtains remained drawn. Her toys, coloring books, and stuffed animals sat exactly as she'd left them. It was as though time had stopped at the doorway. Each year on Lily's birthday, Melissa lit a candle and placed it by the window. Sometimes neighbors joined with flowers or cards. But the gatherings grew smaller with time, and Melissa stopped inviting anyone. Her grief had settled into something silent and personal. Derry, too, changed. The town still functioned. Schools opened, stores remained busy, but it was different. More cautious, more cynical. Parents kept tighter curfews. Children no longer roamed freely after dark. Halloween became chaperoned. Sleepovers became rare. In 2016, the town dedicated a portion of the main playground in Lily's memory. A plaque with her name and a mural of butterflies was installed near the swings. It was a beautiful gesture. They called it Lily's Garden. But beneath the tribute was a community that had never truly healed. Whispers began to take root. Some quietly blamed the police, believing they hadn't done enough or hadn't looked in the right places. Others suspected the truth had been too close to home, that the killer might have been someone from the inside, someone trusted, the kind of person you wouldn't question until it was far too late. Over the years, Derry became a town haunted not just by loss, but by uncertainty. Every unsolved detail lingered like fog. The lack of fingerprints, the unused security footage, the missing minutes on that sunny Friday afternoon. Everyone knew the facts, but no one knew the truth. The case file sat dormant in the archives of the state's cold case division. Stamped, dated, boxed, waiting. Melissa never gave up entirely, though she no longer chased headlines. She kept a small binder of notes, timelines, and printed articles. Every few months, she'd write a letter to the state police asking, hoping that someone would look again. But the replies were always polite and vague. As years turned to nearly a decade, Derry became used to the shadow Lily left behind. Her name became folklore. For new families, she was a warning passed down quietly. For longtime residents, she was a wound that never closed. But buried deep in that box of evidence, beneath degraded samples and forgotten swabs, there were still secrets, waiting for better tools, or better eyes. Could buried evidence still hold secrets, waiting for the right eyes? By late 2022, Lily Anne Whitmore's case had spent nearly a decade buried under the weight of time. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. That autumn, a new initiative launched by the Pennsylvania State Police aimed to re-examine cold cases using modern forensic technology. Among the first to be reviewed, the unsolved 2013 homicide of a 6-year-old girl in Derry. The file landed on the desk of Ava Calder, a 29-year-old forensic genealogist recently hired by the newly expanded Cold Case Investigations Unit. Ava wasn't yet a household name in law enforcement, but among her peers she was considered a rising star. She'd made breakthroughs in 2 other cases earlier that year, both previously stalled by poor quality DNA. When Ava opened Lily's file, she was struck by the haunting photograph of the little girl with pink ribbons and a wide smile. But more than that, she was drawn to the forensic gaps. There had been DNA, just not enough at the time to do anything with. 2 small samples had been collected in 2013, one from beneath Lily's fingernails and another partial touch DNA swab from the handlebar of her pink bike. In the original investigation, both had been degraded by exposure to water and time. The lab techs back then had declared the material unusable, but in 2022, science had caught up. Ava worked with a state lab equipped with next-generation sequencing, a method capable of processing and rebuilding fragmented genetic data. It was slow and expensive, but precise. She submitted the fingernail sample first. Weeks passed. In early December, a result returned. Not a full profile, but enough to begin building a genetic blueprint. It wasn't a direct match to anyone in the criminal database. But then came the breakthrough. Using a process called familial DNA tracing, Ava compared the partial profile against public genealogical databases. Through a series of matches, second cousins, distant relatives, she began to build a family tree. It was like assembling a puzzle from the outside in, inching closer to the center. Ava spent long hours poring over birth records, obituaries, census data, and social media threads. It was meticulous work, but by early January 2023, she had narrowed the possibilities to one extended family with several branches scattered across Pennsylvania and Ohio. Then came the second sample, the one from Lily's bike. It was submitted under the same advanced protocol. The DNA pulled from the handlebar, though faint, confirmed what Ava suspected. It came from the same genetic line as the material under Lily's fingernails. 2 contact points, 2 separate opportunities, 2 chances for truth. That's when one name on the family tree started blinking. Read Thomas Rayburn. He had once worked for a parcel delivery company in Derry. Records showed he had made routine deliveries in the neighborhood where Lily lived during the spring of 2013. He was in his mid-30s. At the time, quiet, never arrested, no known history of violence. He moved out of the area less than a year after the murder. There was no direct evidence yet, no confession, no surveillance footage tying him to the scene. But DNA doesn't forget, and now a single thread, long overlooked, was pulling everything tighter. Ava compiled the findings into a formal report. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the last page. For the first time in nearly 10 years, there was a lead, a name, a direction, but in cold cases, even good science can lead down dead ends. Would this stunning lead finally expose the killer or mislead investigators again? In January 2023, with the genealogical data pointing squarely at one man, Pennsylvania State Police launched a quiet, calculated surveillance operation on 47-year-old Thomas Rayburn. He was living in a modest rental home just outside Butler County, roughly 2 counties over from Derry. According to public records, Rayburn had lived a quiet, unremarkable life since leaving Derry in 2014. No criminal record, no complaints, no online presence, just a middle-aged man working odd jobs, mostly delivery and warehouse gigs, keeping to himself. But the DNA didn't lie. Before making an arrest, investigators needed to confirm the match independently. Undercover officers followed Rayburn's routine for 2 weeks, watching as he visited a local laundromat, bought groceries, and walked his dog along a nearby trail. On a cold morning in early February, he discarded a used coffee cup in a public trash bin. The team retrieved it within minutes. The saliva sample on the rim was rushed to the state crime lab. 3 days later, the results came back. A conclusive match to both the degraded DNA under Lily Whitmore's fingernails and the partial profile on her bicycle's handlebar. There was no ambiguity now. Science had done what time and chance had obscured for nearly a decade. On February 9th, just before dawn, tactical units converged on Rayburn's home. He was taken into custody without incident. No struggle, no protest. He simply asked if he could put on his shoes. Within hours, the arrest was headline news across the state and soon, across the country. Cold case solved after 10 years. Man arrested for murder of 6-year-old in Derry. DNA breakthrough leads to shocking arrest in 2013 child homicide. In Derry, the response was visceral. Residents gathered in silence around the old playground renamed Lily's Garden. Some cried. Some clutched their children. Some just stood still. The name Rayburn was suddenly on everyone's lips, though no one could quite place his face. He had delivered packages in Lily's neighborhood back in 2013. Records confirmed he worked a seasonal route from February to June that year. Lily's street was part of his loop, but he hadn't stood out. He'd never been arrested, never raised red flags, just another face behind a brown uniform. Melissa Whitmore hadn't remembered him, not clearly, but when she heard the name, something clicked. I never saw his face, she told reporters softly, but I've remembered his name ever since. I must have seen it on a label, a box, something. At the press conference, Pennsylvania's Attorney General praised the combined effort of the cold case unit and forensic science, calling it a watershed moment for justice. But amid the applause, there was unease. How had Rayburn slipped through the original investigation? Had he simply blended in? Or had investigators missed something crucial? Melissa, despite the flood of reporters and renewed attention, remained composed. "I don't feel relief," she said. "Not yet. I feel like we've opened the door to something darker." Behind her, an image of Lily flickered on a screen, her smiling face surrounded by butterflies. The town, while grateful for movement, was shaken anew. Because now there was not just a name but a person, a man who had walked their streets, driven past their homes, possibly watched their children, and then vanished only to be found a decade later. The arrest gave the case clarity. But it didn't answer everything. What possible motive could someone like Rayburn have to harm a child? On August 7, 2023, nearly a decade after the disappearance and murder of Lily Anne Whitmore, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Thomas Rayburn officially began. The courthouse in Blair County was filled to capacity. Journalists lined the benches. Local stations broadcast updates live. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice, not just for Lily, but for every unsolved case left gathering dust. Rayburn entered the courtroom in a muted gray suit. He showed little emotion, only briefly glancing at Melissa Whitmore as he was led to the defense table. His plea was clear, not guilty. The prosecution wasted no time establishing its narrative. Their case was built on a triad of damning evidence: DNA, logistics, and behavior. First came the forensic trail. Experts from the state crime lab testified that the DNA recovered from Lily's fingernails, retested with next-generation technology, matched Rayburn's genetic profile with 99.99999% certainty. The touch DNA on Lily's bicycle handlebar also matched. 2 separate locations, 2 separate samples, same man. Then came delivery route records. Archived GPS data from the parcel company confirmed Rayburn had been delivering packages in Lily's neighborhood on the very day she vanished. He had no delivery scheduled on her street that afternoon, yet a time-stamped record showed his vehicle idled 2 blocks away for 14 minutes, between 3:40 and 3:55 p.m. Finally, the digital trail. Prosecutors presented Rayburn's internet history, recovered from an old hard drive seized during his arrest. Among the searches were disturbing phrases: how to get DNA off hands, child alone neighborhood, best hiding spots near water. Melissa Whitmore took the stand on day 5. She recounted Lily's love for butterflies, her routines, the pink bike. Her voice cracked as she described the moment she realized her daughter wasn't coming home. The courtroom was silent as she unfolded a small, faded drawing, a butterfly Lily had given her the week before she vanished. Another powerful moment came when Detective Mark Hill, one of the original investigators, testified about the moment Lily's shoe was found. "It was tiny," he said, holding back tears. "Too small for the world to forget." Rayburn's defense mounted a counterattack built on technicalities. They questioned the chain of custody surrounding the DNA samples. They argued the evidence could have been contaminated over time. They noted the lack of eyewitnesses, lack of direct video footage, and emphasized Rayburn had no history of violence. They leaned hard on motive, or the supposed lack of one. Why would Rayburn, with no apparent connection to Lily, commit such a horrific crime? But the jury wasn't convinced. After 3 weeks of testimony, deliberations lasted just 9 hours. On August 28, 2023, the verdict was read: guilty on all counts: kidnapping, first-degree murder, unlawful restraint, and abuse of a corpse. Sentencing was immediate. Rayburn received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Melissa cried silently, her face in her hands. Outside, a cheer broke out as word spread across the crowd. Justice had come. But it came late, and it came at a price. In the days that followed, debates flared across the state. How had a man with access to children, a history of disturbing searches, and ties to the victim's neighborhood slipped through in 2013? Was it lack of resources, outdated forensic tools, or simply human error? Even with the verdict, the trial left behind a sobering realization. What does Lily's case reveal about the gaps still lurking in our justice system? Today, in forensic science classrooms across the country, The case of Lily Anne Whitmore is studied as a landmark example of how technology, perseverance, and time can intersect to bring justice. It's more than just a case file now. It's a lesson, a warning, and a call to action. But Lily's story didn't just change investigative methods, it changed people. In the years following the trial, her mother, Melissa Whitmore, emerged from grief not as a victim but as a voice. Quiet but resolute, she began to speak at child safety conferences and legislative hearings. She never sought the spotlight, but when she spoke, people listened. Her message was simple. If my daughter's case can be solved after a decade, no case should be forgotten. Out of her advocacy, the grassroots campaign, Justice for Lily, was born. It began as a community movement, ribbons, fundraisers, awareness walks, but quickly evolved into something larger. Through relentless outreach, the campaign helped lobby for increased funding toward Pennsylvania's Cold Case Division. In 2024, the state passed the Cold Case Reform Act, aimed at expanding access to advanced DNA testing, improving interagency evidence sharing, and creating a permanent cold case unit with oversight to prevent investigative neglect. The act was signed into law with Melissa standing silently behind the governor, a framed photo of Lily clutched in her hands. Back in Derry, Lily's garden remains a peaceful, sacred place. The town's playground, once the backdrop of ordinary childhood, was fully renovated in 2025. New swing sets, benches, and bright pink play structures were installed, each bearing small plaques engraved with butterfly symbols. The centerpiece is a mural, Lily drawn with wide eyes and a serene smile surrounded by pink wings and floating stars. It was painted by a local artist who had known her in kindergarten. Families now visit not just to play but to remember. Every spring, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the town hosts a remembrance event. Children release butterflies, families light candles, visitors leave hand-drawn pictures, letters, and flowers beneath the mural. Some bring teddy bears, others bring prayers. What began as a tragic chapter in the town's history has now become its heart. Lily's story has also inspired a wave of reform beyond Pennsylvania. Several states have since adopted similar cold case review programs, many citing the Whitmore case directly. Forensic science departments began partnerships with genealogical researchers to reopen dormant files once thought unsolvable. But legacy is not just measured by law or policy. It's measured by vigilance. Parents in Derry still carry Lily's memory in their everyday choices. School safety protocols have been updated. Background checks on contractors and delivery workers are now standard. Community watch programs have grown. Children are taught not only to recognize danger, but to speak up when something feels wrong. Melissa remains quietly active. She never remarried. She still lives in the same home. Lily's room preserved, but now open to visitors by appointment. Part shrine, part education center. Her grief, though still present, has become fuel for purpose. She once told a reporter, "Justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins there." The real justice is making sure this never happens again. And yet, despite all the reforms, all the laws passed, and all the tears shed, one chilling question still lingers. One that parents, law enforcement, and lawmakers alike must continue to ask. In remembering Lily, are we doing enough to protect the next child? Lily Anne Whitmore's story is a solemn reminder of how one child's disappearance can fracture a town, and how a mother's unyielding love can help piece it back together. For 10 agonizing years, Lily's name lingered in the silence of an unsolved crime. Her face remained etched in missing persons flyers, her room untouched, her community frozen in fear. Yet against all odds, justice came. Not swiftly, not easily, but it came. Through advanced DNA technology and the determination of new investigators, truth finally overcame time. The arrest of Thomas Rayburn didn't just close a case. It shattered the illusion that evil always comes with warning signs. It forced a reckoning in Derry and beyond. But Lily's legacy reaches far beyond a courtroom verdict. Her case revealed systemic gaps, how evidence can be forgotten, how tips can be ignored, and how families can be left waiting in darkness. Because of her, policies changed. Cold cases were reopened. Laws were reformed. She became more than a victim. She became a catalyst. Today, her mural stands as both a tribute and a warning. Her story is taught in classrooms, remembered in playgrounds, and whispered in legislative chambers. We owe it to Lily, and every child like her, to do better. If this story moved you, share it in her memory. Justice isn't just about the past. It's about the legacy we choose to leave behind.